There are basic principles for just war that have been developed throughout history. These principles, formally, we've always started with speaking of just war and jus ad bellum, meaning when can someone justly call a war? Later developments, especially in the 1600s, included jus in bello. What are some principles that need to be followed within war? And more recently, people will also speak of jus post bellum, meaning after war. However, that's not as well developed, but there are some principles which we can discuss for that. For the first, jus ad bellum. These principles, as I say, again, come from Augustine, from Aquinas, and basically are three. There must be a just cause. Why are we going to war? It's not merely to capture slaves or because we want to acquire more property. Rather, there is something perhaps of another country that has attacked us and has killed innocent people in our country. The second principle is that the war must be declared by a just authority. Just authority meaning we're speaking of a society that has a legitimate authority that is recognized and acknowledged not only by the people within but also by the people without. So it's called by a just authority. And the third basic principle that Thomas Aquinas presents is that the reason for fighting the war, we have a just cause, but as we fight, we are seeking peace, not merely retaliation and vengeance and revenge. We're trying to reestablish something of an order, but we are doing it, as I say, not merely to destroy the other people. So those are the three basic principles of jus ad bellum. However, some others were added, especially, as I say, in the 1500s, 1600s, the colonial imperial period. There we have a couple of key figures that arise. Suarez, a Jesuit, and De Vitoria, a Dominican. Also a Dutch philosopher, Grotius, and they're kind of three key figures who ended up developing the historical theory of just war. So that's where they added into ad bellum the question of proportionality. But proportionality could also go into the next category, which is jus in bello. Jus in bello is how do we fight the war once we're in it? And here one of the principal points, or a principle, is proportion. That when we're fighting the war, or whoever is fighting the war, there's a proportionality between what has occurred, what caused the war, but also in the battle itself. We can take some historical examples. Actually, this is a historical example even that goes back to the ancients, where the question was whether a charioteer could fight equally, whether there was proportion between a charioteer and a cavalier, someone who is on a horse. So this question of proportion is an ancient discussion. Today we would say if someone has nuclear warheads, is there going to be proportion if a country with nuclear weapons is fighting against a poorer country that has no such development? So proportion is a critical discussion. Also, though, within the war, we have to discuss the question of the people. Non-combatants, people who are not, we have non-soldiers who are involved in the war, because a war is fought on the ground and there are people involved. So non-combatants must not be attacked directly, although sometimes we know there are casualties of war who are innocent, but we must avoid that at all costs. Also, there's the question of prisoners of war and the treatment of prisoners of war, that they must be treated with a dignity, that there should not be torture, nor should there be execution. Now, there again are other principles that some will bring up, even as to the means, but that's also a question of proportionality, that we shouldn't use anything that is intrinsically evil, like germ warfare or genocide. So depending on the theorist you're looking at, whether theological or philosophical principles, they might include other principles, but usually they can be categorized in different ways. The final point would be jus post bellum. For jus post bellum, that's not a traditional category, but it has been developed by some philosophers, theologians, social theorists. Jus post bellum is a question of how do we arbitrate peace at the end of a war. This requires someone who is neutral, someone who is not the person attacked initially or the attacker initially. And this is difficult. This is why we have like the United Nations, NATO, who will come in and try to help negotiate treaties, try to negotiate peace. Other questions, though, come in when you're speaking of post-bellum. When does the war end? Is it the first treaty? Is it the final treaty? Is it the last shot fired? Is it after all reparations have been made? So jus post bellum is actually hard to even categorize, because many would argue as to whether we're still in war. When is that war still going on, or has it actually ended, and can we truly say there is peace? But then there's the question of what is peace? Is peace merely an absence of war? Of course not. We know many countries where there is no actual fighting going on, but there is no peace. There may be no firing going on today, but that country is not at peace. So jus post bellum is a very complex discussion.